James was bothered by the girl next door all day long, with loud noises and partying all night. Thinking it was just a mean neighbor, it turned out that behind this action was an unexpected revenge and plan. Once again, the neighbors kept the whole street awake with their rowdy antics. James pounded on the door several times, but it was as if no one heard. The noise seemed to escalate further. The woman who lived in the apartment found it all hilarious. A deep voice grumbled, and then the music resumed. Dragging himself out of bed, James grabbed his robe. With disgruntled steps, he made his way to the landing and pressed the doorbell next door. "What's the matter, old man?" A young woman with vibrant makeup peeked through the slightly open door. "Kyle, it's 2 in the morning, James said wearily. "I can't sleep because of all the racket. You guys are too loud." "Can't sleep, huh?" Kyle smirked and called out to someone inside. "Hey, Alex, the old man can't handle the noise. What's his problem?" A burly figure emerged at the doorway. It was Kyle's boyfriend, who had been crashing with her for over 3 months now. "There's action here almost every other night," he remarked with a grin. "Partying, laughing till dawn, you old-timer. Why not pop a sleeping pill? You'll snooze like a baby." Kyle burst into laughter as Alex shut the door in James's face. The elderly gentleman trudged wearily back to his apartment, head bowed low. He swallowed a sedative, slipped beneath the covers, and pulled them over his head to muffle the cacophony outside. Meanwhile, the neighboring revelers showed no signs of stopping. It was only James who suffered from their disruptive antics. The adjacent apartment sat vacant, and the occupants below were deaf, oblivious to the disturbance they caused. Despite James's repeated calls to the local police, there was no relief. By the time they arrived, the commotion would have died down. At 81, James's hearing remained sharp, but his heart ached, exacerbated by Kyle's erratic behavior. She not only deprived him of sleep, but also callously littered cigarette butts outside his door. Despite his grievances, the landlord turned a blind eye. "We're neighbors," she said dismissively. "We ought to find a way to coexist peacefully." So the old man took a sedative at night just to get some sleep, though the doctors strictly told him not to take great pains in this case. That night, James dozed off only after taking drops. He was dreaming of his family again, his wife, Janet, and his son, Tommy. Janet died more than 20 years ago. His heart couldn't bear the grief, as at that time they received a notice of death for Tommy. It was terrible. It seemed to be the peacetime, but there was a war somewhere. Our men were dying. They said they were heroes, but who needed their heroism? It was a tragedy for parents. Serge had dreamt of becoming a military man since his childhood. He was doing sports and studied well, yet he failed to score 1 point to get into the military university. However, Tommy didn't fall back. "I'll be a soldier," he said to his father back then, period. He went into the army for compulsory military service, so it seemed like he finished the service. That's it, enough. But no. The guy turned out to be tenacious. He applied to the military institute again, and then he got lucky. He was accepted. Tommy's parents were both thrilled for their son and very worried. "Son, being a military man is risky." Janet gently tried to talk him out of it. "Anything can happen." "Mum, what are you worried about?" Tommy laughed. "I'm going to train soldiers. It's also common in the country now. What wars can there be nowadays? We won the war long ago." Janet nodded, but her heart felt uneasy. "Come on, Mother." James was telling her off. "You should be proud of your son." "We raised a real man." James spent all his life working at school, taught history to children, and taught by the example of great men to be steadfast, courageous, and not give up on their goals. He remembered an example, His own father, who went to the war front as a young lieutenant in 1941, fought heroically but died in Moscow. Son, you carry on the family tradition. Your grandfather was a hero, and you will be by all means. Don't let him down. He admonished Tommy, and then sighing said, "Yourself." "Dad, don't be afraid," Tommy joked. "Everything will be all right." Tommy had just graduated when the war broke out in our country. Terrible, incomprehensible. Janet and James, clutching their fingers tightly, watched the news of the war effort. Somewhere out there was their son. Tommy wrote seldom and briefly. He said he was alive and healthy, and asked not to worry about him. Then, silence. They did not hear anything from him for half a year. James went to the enlistment office to find out something. They said it was not their departments, but he was reassured. Military men sometimes cannot write, or maybe letters just didn't come. One day, their doorbell rang. Janet opened the door. There was a military man on the threshold looking confused. "I'm here to see you," he said, hiding his eyes. "I have to tell you something." The soldier went into the apartment and read out the documents. Janet and James only heard that he died heroically defending his position. The lights went out. Their only son, their pride and hope, died buried there. Parents never heard the military commendation for their son. They never saw the medal he had brought. "Why?" Janet shouted to the servicemen. "Why are you here?" And my Tommy stayed there. "Lucy," James cried, hugging his wife by the shoulders. "Don't be like that. Don't be like that. What is he to blame for?" The soldier indeed felt guilty, though he was not guilty at all. He apologized and went away as palest shock. It was evidently the first time he had been on such an errand. Janet was taken away by ambulance that night and was gone by morning. Lucy, her heart exploded with grief. More than 20 years passed since then. James retired long ago. School children from his former school regularly visit him to help him with their household chores or to listen about search. Journalists came several times when they collected material about the heroes of the recent war. James willingly speaks about his son and shows his awards, the order and a medal, which he received a year after his son's death. Over the years, the pain subsided a little, but the memory remained. Things would be fine, except that his neighbor Kyle pestered him with her boyfriend. She has no shame, yet her mother, Catherine, used to be friends with Tommy. James remembered how they were wandering in the park. He saw them through the window as the park was nearby, and how his son was gone until the morning after that. Tommy has just graduated and left for the war. Janet and James even thought they were getting married. Then, all of a sudden, Kate got married to a businessman and gave birth to Kyle. Janet at first thought that she was Tommy's daughter. She thought that the girl looked like her son. She even mentioned in a whisper to Kate that she might be Tommy's. Kate was so exasperated, she had a big fight with her neighbors. 2 years ago, Kate and her husband died in a car crash, and Kyle was left alone. But she continued the behavior of her mother. She didn't say hello to James. She behaved nastily, as if she enjoyed it in some way. Still, James was patient. Yes, he called the police officer, but it was only twice, and that did not do any good. Then, one night, his neighbor suddenly rang the doorbell. James was in the middle of a good night's sleep, and the doorbell rang. He had to get up. He got up quickly. It was Kylie. "What do you want?" the old man asked through the door. "James, do you have a corkscrew?" Kyle asked. "No," answered James, and threatened, "Go to bed, or I'll call the police." "Oh, you scared me so much." The girl laughed. "How many times have you done that already?" Kyle. James opened the door. "How long are you going to make fun of me?" This has been going on since Kate, your mother, died. Does it bring you any pleasure?" The old man was angry. His hands were shaking. He was so fed up with it all. "Insolent girl. Me? Pleasure?" Kyle smirked. "Do you want to be honest? I want to expand my apartment. If you die, I'll take the entire floor. Alex has already bought my neighboring apartment. You're the only one on our way to the landing. Tell me, when will you die?" The girl swung towards James, her face distorted into a malicious grimace. Otherwise, he would really believe this old man. We must just send him away gently. Why mess with crazy people? James was already writing his report with his old horn-rimmed glasses on his nose. He could hardly keep his pen in his unruly, trembling hands, but he wrote every letter diligently. The policeman whispered to the officer on duty that the old man should not be too much trouble. He nodded understandingly. "I see, Greybeard." He read what James wrote in the report. "Don't worry, we'll figure it out." "Will you?" the old man asked disbelievingly. "Maybe I should go see the investigator." "No, I'll hand everything over, and the investigator isn't here right now," the young policeman answered. "He's out in the field." The old man nodded comprehensively and left the station. The officer on duty threw the application in the trash without registering it. A week passed. James waited for a response from the police, but there was nothing. James waited for a response from the police, but there was nothing. Then he called the police and asked about his case. "What case?" Another officer on duty sounded surprised, but then remembered that the guys were talking about some psycho and lied. "Ah, yes. You'll be summoned to the police station a little later. The investigator is working on your case." James wasn't born yesterday. He realized that the officer on duty lied to him. He decided that maybe Kyle will calm down. At night, she came to the old man's door and whispered through the keyhole, "Old stump, they've been waiting for you there already." She whispered so loudly. James woke up from that whisper, and then he couldn't sleep till morning. In the morning, he was all worked up and went back to the police station. Police officers had just gathered there for a briefing. The old man passed by important officials, and some less important people came running, and he tried to ask someone what he should do in this situation, but everyone just waved him off. James went back to the officer on duty. "Greybeard, aren't you bored?" the policeman asked, tiredly. "Go see the doctor and ask him to prescribe you a good sedative. Everything you say is nonsense. Your district officer checked everything. Your neighbors are good citizens." "These good citizens were whispering in my door last night," James said in a trembling voice, "wishing I was dead." "Listen, get out of here." The policeman looked at the old man mockingly. "I'm not going anywhere," the old man declared. "I'll be waiting for your chiefs." "We'll wait then," the policeman sighed. Meanwhile, in the chief's office, policemen were discussing business matters, and the meeting was coming to an end. "By the way," suddenly remembered the chief of the department, "who is that old man in the corridor? I have seen him several times. Who does he come to?" "Yes, the local freak," answered the chief of the station. "He thinks his neighbors are hounding him to death. And is that not so?" The chief of the department looked sternly at him. "Well, of course," Samus checked. "They are quite decent people, a young family. Well, maybe they are a little noisy sometimes, and the Greybeard runs to the presses." "All right, but make sure you don't make a mistake." No sooner had the chief finished his sentence than some noise was heard in the corridor. It was James, who was tired of waiting and demanded a pen and paper once again. The staff came up to him and tried to persuade the old man to calm down, but the old man was brought to despair as they did not believe him. He listened to no one and nothing. James shouted, became indignant, threatened someone. He did not look quite adequate from the outside. Suddenly, he grabbed his heart. "What is it, old man? A heart attack? The police officers became alerted. Why worry so much? Sit on a chair. Have a rest. We're going to call an ambulance. There is no need for an ambulance. I have my own pills, James whispered, reaching into his pocket for his purse, which also contained pills. He fumbled for the blister of medicine with his clumsy fingers and pulled it. The photo card fell out of the purse after he took the pill straight to the feet of the head of the department, what personally come out to see what all the fuss was about. The chief picked up the pills and handed the old man the photo card. Only for a moment, his eyes lingered on the photo, and he immediately went pale. "Who is this guy to you?" the head of the department asked in a frantic voice, pointing to the photo. On it, Tommy looked at the world straight and honest in his new lieutenant's uniform, newly graduated from the institute. "That's my son, Tommy," James answered in a weak voice, putting a tablet of Valadol under his tongue. "Son?" The head of the department was stunned. This is the lieutenant who saved us, the enlisted man in those distant times. For a moment, the memory took the chief back to a distant youth, when he, a 19-year-old kid, got in the very mess. "It's okay, guys. We'll get through this," Lieutenant Surge reassured them after each battle. And they, 19-year-old boys, trusted this lieutenant like a god. He would not leave them. And he didn't. One night, the fight started unexpectedly. The guys were fighting like tigers. Then a grenade fell next to them. It didn't burst, but the pin was gone. All of them froze. There were about 10 of them, and mentally said goodbye to this world. But then the lieutenant sharply rushed to their grenade and laid down on it. He was killed, but the guys were alive, including John, who is now the chief of the police department. "Sure," said the head of the department aloud as he continued to hold the photo in his hand. "Is this the very same lieutenant?" asked one of the subordinates who knew that story. "Yes, this man saved my life and the lives of a dozen other young soldiers." John raised the photo so that everyone in the department could see it. "I live only because this man did not think of himself." He turned to James. "Old man, thank you. I always remembered your son and I will never forget what he did. Let's go to my office and talk." James, together with the chief, went into his office. What did they talk about? The subordinates did not know, but everyone was a little shocked. They thought he was just a weirdo, but he turned out to be the father of a hero. You can't do that to a man. They somehow felt embarrassed. Michael talked a little about Tommy, told James how they served under his leadership, and promised to meet again. He was recently transferred to the city, and then the head of the department asked about the case that brought the old man to the police. "I will still deal with your report. The perpetrators will be punished," he said firmly. "There's no need to punish anyone." James gestured. "I understand that my story really sounds absurd, but it is true. I just want to live out my days in peace. And this girl decided to speed things up. I almost don't sleep." "Don't worry, James. I'll personally supervise the investigation," Michael assured. That's how it happened. They decided to catch the neighbor red-handed when she was doing nasty things. James's apartment was bugged. A camera was discreetly placed on the landing. The very next day, there was a report with all the evidence on the desk of the chief of police. Yes, the old man was being morally destroyed on purpose. "And you could have done everything earlier," sighed the chief. At least now James will breathe a sign of relief. When the neighbors were summoned to the police, James went there too. Kyle was sitting with her head down in the office, and her boyfriend was silent. The investigator even threatened them with imprisonment for what they had done. "I just cannot understand one thing, Kyle. Why do you hate me so much?" James asked. "What have I done to you? What have you done? Because of your son, my mother has been living her whole life on a volcano." "What did my son do to your mother?" James was surprised. "I remember that they were friends." "They were friends? Mum told me in a whisper a week before she died that I was your son, Tommy's daughter. And Daddy wasn't my birth father," Kyle cried. "You understand? The father that I loved all my life was not my father." When Janet was born, she immediately recognized the truth. She was their granddaughter. Now James finally grasped how much Kyle resembled Tommy, though their behaviors differed. But what could be done? Blood ties were one matter, upbringing another entirely, and both held significant sway. Puzzled, James confronted Kyle. "Knowing I'm your grandfather, why continue this charade?" Kyle's roommate smirked. "What's there to explain?" she retorted. After his passing, she'd established their kinship and claim his apartment. He had no other heirs after all. "It's all about the apartment," James murmured, bewildered. "Kyle, had you been honest, I would have gladly given it to you. Now I'm sorry. You've caused me great pain." James exited the station, leaving behind a quiet neighborhood, likely still recovering from a recent police visit that must have rattled them. Kyle avoided encountering the elderly man. Abruptly, Alex vanished, selling his vacant apartment. Soon, a young family with 2 children moved in, bringing occasional noise. Nevertheless, James cherished the sound of children's laughter, finding solace in it. He engaged with the friendly new neighbors, Anne and Mason, both teachers who had relocated from the village. The elderly man observed their routine, noticing they often left with bags of groceries on weekends, presumably to tend to Anne's elderly, ailing parents who lived in the city. Despite the distance, they remained accustomed to travel. Mason wistfully expressed a desire to have Anne's parents closer. James echoed the sentiment, acknowledging their financial constraints due to the mortgage on their apartment, leaving Anne saddened. The conversation appeared to have concluded. A month later, James passed away. Kyle, who had been quiet lately, suddenly became alert. It then emerged that the elderly gentleman had bequeathed a generous gift to Anne, while Kyle received only a brief note stating, "This is your father," accompanied by a photograph of Tommy dressed in a lieutenant's uniform along with a commendation and a medal.